It's great to be here. It's inspiring to be here with the young leaders from the Join Our Core that represent, I think, the future of an incredible industry that many of us will be dead before we're able to see the fruition of the industry to occur. I'll read my prepared remarks and then we can dive into questions. The first thing I wanted to present was a poem by Langston Hughes, Dream Deferred. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust over like a sugary, syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags under a heavy load. Or does it explode? So as I watched the footage from the March on Washington, the 50th anniversary commemoration, the image that came into my mind was the image of thousands of people of all colors gathered in the most unequal city in America, the city that I grew up in, the city that has the highest Gini coefficient in the entire country, the city of Washington, D.C. And I thought about the 9% of students that graduate from college that grow up in the city of Washington, D.C. And I thought about the 7 times higher likelihood of African American male to go to prison in the city of Washington, D.C. than the white brothers in the city of Washington, D.C. And I couldn't help but think of the words of Langston Hughes, what happens to a dream deferred? Again, earlier this month, I traveled to Brazil, and I was sitting and walking through the favelas in Rio and Belo Horizonte and Recife, and we're walking with young people that had incredible aspirations to do great things in this world. And there was no infrastructure, no solid education, no health care or solid health care programs for their children. And I began to think to myself of Langston Hughes' poem, does it stink like rotten meat? Finally, I'm watching Martin Luther King III stand in the same exact spot as his dad, talking about the tremendous distance between the economic dreams for which his father was killed, of bringing economic justice and equality to the great country and the even greater world, and thinking to myself about these really, really tough questions that Langston Hughes presents for us. So then the idea comes to me as I'm preparing for this speech that not only is this community a really, really important community because it has significant social impact on the world, but it's actually the operationalization of the it's operationalizing the dream that Martin Luther King had in an economic sense. And the organizations that are represented on the panel today, the aspirations of many of the entrepreneurs, the base model and base case that Ben & Jerry's presents is operationalizing the dream for economic justice. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so inspired to do the work that I do at the Calvert Funds, which is a fund that came out of this community where we invest in 2 examples really quickly, just because I mentioned the 2 conditions that I was looking at in the March on Washington. One is we invested in a company called Burn Zillion, along with other investors, put in $8 million to this company that's designed to level the playing field of inequities in education through online 3-minute videos that help master teachers prepare for the upcoming change in core curriculum around the country in 2015, which will impact students worldwide, nationwide in terms of testing. So we were able to, as a community, really, and one of the organizations in this community, fund a direct operationalization of the dream. Another company that we funded was a company in Brazil that focuses on funding companies that are, it's a $100 million fund focused on base of the pyramid resources, funding companies that are working on healthcare, financial inclusion, and education services for the lowest income people in Brazil to try to change the cycle and change the ability for people to realize their dreams. So the big idea is simple. I started working with entrepreneurs in New Orleans and post-Katrina New Orleans, helping them to grow. I joined the Calvert funds under the leadership of a tremendous mentor and founder of Calvert, who's Wayne Silby, and was able to fund companies that weren't being funded by anybody else in the country or the world, because we have lived in what we call the donut, which is appropriate for New Orleans, or the beignet, except it doesn't have a hole, which is where the capital doesn't go. So now the question is, what's needed in the social entrepreneurial ecosystem? And I think what's needed is $1 billion plus buyout fund that buys 100 to $200 million companies in this space to help provide a way for them to scale their impact financially, but also operationalizing a moving needle strategy for the values that Martin Luther King stood for. So I'm almost up on my time, I'm sure, but I'm going to end it with another poem that when Langston Hughes reached inside of the human spirit, and after he talked about the dream deferred, he also talked about the dream keeper. And it's, bring me all you dreams, you dreamers. Bring me your heart's melodies, so that we can wrap them in blue cloud cloth away from the too tough fingers of this world. And that's my message to all of us, is that as we're protecting the dream and operationalizing the dream, doing things like this session, making dough and making change and thinking big about the solutions is the only way that we'll ever get there. So,
thank you. So, what you're saying is there is a moral case, not just the business case, there's a moral case. They need to come together, because that's what Luther King was talking about. Is that, it's not just about it's the right thing to do from all sorts of reasons. But I just want to come on to the financial markets, because financial markets don't give a shit about morals. They're amoral. They are there to basically maximize profits. They don't bring morality into it at all, and they don't want to. So you talk, you work in the financial system. You talk about, let's get $1 billion fund to do all this, but actually, the world, despite the financial crisis, the world is awash with capital. There's money all over the place, but it doesn't get directed to this. So how do you think we can actually change that? So actually, the financial markets, that money does actually come, and does actually potentially have a moral equation to it as well as the business equation. Is that?
I'm not running away. I just got to switch sides. This is a gentleman whose name is Jim Coulter. Jim Coulter runs a $100 billion plus private equity fund called TPG. And one of the things that he's the best in the world in is going in chaotic situations, like the field of impact investing and social impact, and finding ways to create value. But also in looking at companies that are undervalued for specific reasons. And I think one of those reasons is that the social impact of a company isn't appreciated. And as the millennial generation comes into the buying market, these companies, just like many other companies, will have an uptick in valuation. And if you can convince investors that that's the case, then money will follow.
So it's always going to be a finance. So is it possible to tie in Dr. King's vision with a financial vision? Or actually, are those always going to be separate? Because actually, that's what creates that inequality, doesn't it? That actually, the financial market is still looking for that sort of, that's where we can make the money, but actually, they're amoral. Is that the problem?
So I think the second...
You've got a slide for every question, and you don't even know what I'm going to ask.
I like to talk about...
that.
Many of you probably know Wayne. Wayne founded the Calvert Funds after being at a Buddhist right living seminar in terms of modifying the model of one of the highest yield money market funds in the country to enable people to invest in line with their values. So do I think shareholders appreciate within the $12 billion in assets of the Calvert funds invested in line with their values. They do, and within the private equity part of what we do, which what we do is public equities, I think they're particularly excited to see the $100 million funds that we invest in that are creating impact by investing in companies all over the world, and the $5 to $10 million companies of which we invested in about 30 of.
Yeah, just to challenge that, you know, the capital markets have $125 trillion a year, whatever it is. I mean, vast. I mean, this is like, you know, peanuts. I mean, are we ever, you know, in a sense, this question I put to everyone. Great that you've got little examples, but actually, is it ever going to scale up? Because that's what's got to happen. You're not going to transform nothing with $5 billion, are you? We need to have trillions of dollars piling into, you know, renewable energy, into the green growth economy, etc., etc. Just get on with that.
Well, I think, you know, Jay said earlier that they're focused on structural change, and I think that's an aspect of it. But, you know, I started my career trying to regulate the biggest banks in the world to protect low-income homeowners. And I did that for 3 years. And, there was just so much money that was coming into predatory lending, basically legally stealing from poor people. I can't describe it in any other way. That I began to think about going and creating a business model that created significant change. And I think that scaling up companies so that they don't have to compromise their values at the $100 million to $200 million level, and creating a structure that supports them with a competitive advantage around social impact is one of the ways in which that can be done. I'm not sure, unless that happens, or unless that part of the ecosystem happens, that we enable the entire cultural shift to become business as usual as a movement.
Okay, right, you can sit down now.